From the far reaches of the Milky Way galaxy, it's Retro Nerd Girl with a film review for you. Today, I'll be reviewing the movie Teen Wolf, released in 1985, starring Michael J. Fox, James Hampton, and Susan Ursitti. Directed by Rod Daniel. The synopsis is, Scott Howard seems like an average teenage boy until he discovers that he's a werewolf. The story. After the financial success of Valley Girl, released in 1983, starring a young Nicolas Cage, the powers that be behind this film decided to try to create a similar success strategy by shooting a low-budget film that would produce big box office profits. Comic book writer and screenwriter Jep Loeb was hired to write the script along with Matthew Wiseman. Rod Daniel was hired to direct this film, blending two very popular film genres at the same time, teen movies and the upsurgence of wolf movies that was so prevalent in the 1980s. Earlier films with a similar premise was the horror flick I Was a Teenage Werewolf, released in 1957, and the wacky comedy Full Moon High, released in 1981. The pacing. At an hour and 31 minutes, it's pretty good. It takes about 30 minutes to set up the premise, and that's a bit where it gets too slow. Everything makes sense in the order that it's in, and it's a fun ride, but I just couldn't help feeling as if a lot of the runtime was a little bit bloated. The challenge. The first challenge in the story is that Scott is a werewolf through a family curse. At first you would think that it would be something that he would have to hide, but in this strange alternative universe, it's something that people are indeed a little bit startled by, maybe sometimes even afraid of, but everyone seems to be okay with it in the most part, and even encourages Scott to turn into the werewolf all the time. The secondary challenge for Scott is Mick, who is a 20-year-old bully who has been rumored to have been jailed and held back in school a few times. He plays on the rival basketball team. He hates Scott with a passion, not because of his basketball skills, but because he knows how much Scott keeps making moves towards his girlfriend. Well, let's say his on and off girlfriend, Pamela. It's actually a good reason to get pretty upset at a person for always trying to hit on the person that you're dating. But he's pretty much your average unreasonable teen flick scary bad guy bully. They don't make him very smart and or likable in any way. Even if you like bad guys, he's still not likable. And then we have Pamela, who is a shallow but gorgeous drama student that is only after the most popular boy in the room. Once Scott becomes the wolf, she can sense his animal magnetism almost immediately, and it's the only reason she even takes notice of him. When Scott becomes a star basketball player and everyone loves him, she literally wants to be his trophy when she thinks it will benefit her popularity in school. The thing that's really so frustrating about her character is that she's smart enough to be a better person, but she chooses to be this trophy for whoever is really the most popular, and it's so clear that she doesn't even like Scott or Mick. So her identity is completely based on a lie. It's really sad the way her character is written in the story, but unfortunately there are real people who exist like this. So I'm not too mad about it. There's also Mr. Thorn, who's actually pretty much the film's main antagonistic person who has a huge grudge against the Howard family of wolves and really watches Scott's every move with scrutiny and disdain. You know, the challenges, though, are pretty minor in the story and diffused by the comedy and the sheer unbelievability of the story. Somehow all of these challenges work to provide more tension for Scott to react to. Now the empathy. Scott is pretty likable because he's just a scrawny kid trying to make it through school. He's not a perfect character, but you do root for him and you hope that he can catch a break. Once he discovers that he's a wolf, there's a lot of comedy surrounding the awkward process of Scott's transforming into the wolf, and it's treated almost like the trials and tribulations of puberty. It's actually quite funny. However, Scott begins to see many of his shortcomings as a human being dissolve in his animal form. As the wolf, he's endowed with many perks like giving him more athletic prowess, transforming him into the star player of his basketball team, and it gives him incredible charisma amongst his classmates. One thing I liked about this movie's take on the werewolf was all of the fun that Scott had as the werewolf. Fun he usually never has as a human being. For once in a movie, the werewolf is not a scary monster, but a cool guy who would like to have fun with his strengths. I think that it's the reason why so many fans found the film to be so endearing. You can't help smiling as you see the wolf smiling and having fun too. And since we like Scott and the wolf, it's hard to see him make so many terrible choices, as choosing to be with a girl like Pamela versus the girl who has been by his side from the beginning and loves him unconditionally, Lisa Booth Marconi. Booth is a very unique nickname, but the story behind that is that her name was based on one of the writer's high school girlfriends. Isn't that so cute? Aww. Booth is pretty cool. Part of the reason she's pretty cool to me is that she doesn't change hoping to get Scott's attention, and she is just there for him when he needs her. That's real love, and I totally dig that. I'm not sure if there was time to develop her character more, but I wish there was a little bit more to her identity besides just being the girl who loves Scott. I just love the relationship between Scott and his dad. His dad is not really super involved in Scott's life, but he's very, very present as a parent. He lovingly gives his son enough space to figure out a whole lot of things by himself. And that's probably the most a person can do. However, he's always there to back him up if he needs to. He's like a great example of how a dad should be, you know, or parents in general. Harold Howard, at some point in the story, tells Scott, "With great power comes even greater responsibility," which is a modification on an iconic line that Uncle Ben tells Peter Parker in the Spider-Man comics and movies. It's an obvious influence from Jeff Loeb, who had also written for the Spider-Man comics in the 1990s. It's a cool little factoid there for you, Spider-Man fans out there. I couldn't go without talking about Scott's best friend, Styles, who is a rebel with a wild side for fun and making a profit. Hey, you know, why not? And, you know, one other thing about Styles is that many people tend to notice how many colorful t-shirts he wears throughout this film and how hilarious they are. And it's also, you know, become kind of part of the iconic identity of styles, which I think is very cool. I mean, he knows how to have a lot of fun and almost acts like a ringleader at parties, helping the film to keep this tone of a very lighthearted, fun adventure. In fact, many of the supporting characters really embody the same comedic charm, as if self-aware of what this film is supposed to be. Somewhere along the film, I realized that this is actually not just about a boy who discovers he's a wolf, but it's very much a sports movie. Can you believe that? Would you ever guess that from looking at the poster? It's a sports film. I'm not much of a basketball fan, I tell you, I pretty much glazed over all of the basketball scenes. I didn't know what was going on, but according to real basketball fans or people who play basketball, those scenes didn't make any sense either. But, I don't think it's really stopped me from enjoying the film, because through the sport, our main character really experiences his arc. And I think that's pretty cool. Now, the technical aspects. This was an inexpensive production for sure. They didn't really spend a whole lot of money on this. The high school was so close to the airport that they had to stop shooting when planes flew overhead. The entire production was said to have taken only 21 days. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but most of the teenagers in this film are clearly much older. Even though Michael J. Fox looked the part, he was about 23 at the time. Mark Arnold, who played Mick, was 27 at the time. I mean, he's like definitely one of the oldest that you could point out. And the film tried to make up for it by saying his character was 20. But boy, I'm looking at him and I'm like, that is a grown man right there. It was a little hilarious to watch, but hey, that's the 80s. Now, the makeup effects for 1985 were a little rudimentary. We had seen better in a lot of other films, but it really doesn't hold up over time. But I thought that the transformation scene with all of the effects, they were pretty iconic at the time, even though they weren't the best. And building the comedy structure around the film really helped us to not pay attention or not depend so intensely on the effects. And they went for a more Wolfman look instead of a realistic wolf look, which we had seen in other films around that time period in the 1980s, when the makeup techniques had innovatively grown into believability. The werewolf makeup took nearly 4 hours to apply, but it took James Hampton, the actor who played Scott's dad, 30 seconds to rip it off because it made him feel very claustrophobic. Now to the soundtrack. It really had a strong synth vibe from the 1980s, but not many standout tracks, with the exception of the classic Beach Boys Surfin' USA, and that was used for one of the most memorable scenes in the film, when the wolf dances, surfs, and performs a plethora of stunts on top of a Wolfmobile truck. Who doesn't love that scene? It's amazing. Performances. Michael J. Fox accepted the role of Scott during a time when his TV show, Family Ties, that first aired in 1982, his co-star Meredith Baxter became pregnant and the show needed to be put on hold for a while. He's fantastic in this, even though he was not really thrilled to play the role and flat out refused to return for the sequel. He's just such a professional, you just can't tell. And he was the pulse of this film. I can't imagine the success of this film without him, because it's through his acting that the audience was able to really take the story seriously enough to enjoy. It's kind of interesting that he's 23 during the filming, but he has that cute little crackle in his voice, just like a teenager going through puberty. Jay Tarsis plays the Beavers coach and really brings a very memorable energy to the film. The comedic timing of some of the lines that he delivers and just his mannerisms, it's truly remarkable. James Hampton was also very memorable in his role as Scott's dad and really sold their relationship. The wish list. There were a few intensive terms that were present during the 1980s that really prevents this from being a timeless film. I mean, like, for crying out loud, there was a character in the film by the name of Chubby, and one or two racially insensitive jokes. There was a slight goof in the film where Scott hears a dog whistle and his father, who is right beside him in the film, is completely unaffected by it. So with the probability of the premise for the film being very unlikely, this is such a small gripe, and I know this. But I kind of wish it had more of a flawless energy and more timeless feel to the story. Now, the enjoyment. A few months before the release of this film, Back to the Future, which was also released in 1985, hit theaters and became a huge blockbuster. Michael J. Fox's popularity launched Teen Wolf into the stratosphere, which landed it an animated TV series from 1986 to 1988. Oh my God, does anybody remember that animated TV show? It was my Saturday morning ritual for 2 years, and it was so good. A true time waster to be sure of, but it definitely kept that flame going for the Teen Wolf fans. There was a sequel in 1987 starring Jason Bateman. And 24 years later, MTV created a show called Teen Wolf from 2011 to 2017 with a more serious tone. Teen Wolf was really a big deal when it came out in 1985, mainly because it was a chance for teenage girls to see one of their favorite heartthrobs on the big screen, playing a cool wolf character. Yes, it was really corny, juvenile, and silly, but charmingly wonderful in its own unique way. And for all of those reasons, it was a true one-of-a-kind. Cinematically, the story begins where it ends, on the basketball court, where Scott eventually challenges himself to be a better human being. It's a feel-good relic of the 1980s. And that's why I howl for Teen Wolf. Ow! My rating is a 7.8. Well, that sums up my review. I hope you liked it. This is Retro Nerd Girl signing off. Take care, movie lovers. I'm off to my next review.